Mr. Tanen's Tie Trouble by Marian Coke Leffler. Mr. Tanen loves being the principal of the Lyndhurst School. He also loves ties. In fact, he has almost 1,000 crazy ties. When Mr. Tanen returned from winter vacation, he received a call from Mr. Apple at the school department. Mr. Apple told him that because many things at the school had to be fixed, there wasn't enough money left for a new playground. Mr. Tanen sadly hung up the phone and gazed out at the broken down playground. He heard a clink clank. He looked up to see Kaylee and Alex sludging in a big jar filled with money. Here it is, $148.29 for the playground fund, said Kaylee proudly. New playground, here we come, cheered Alex. Mr. Tanen didn't know what to say. After school, Mr. Tanen sat in his office staring at the jar. He sighed. Now I am in a real pickle. This is not enough money for a playground. The kids will be so disappointed. Mr. Apple's words floated around in his head. The playground will have to wait. You think of something. I wish our account was as full as your tie closet. As full as my tie closet? Repeated Mr. Tanen. He jumped up, opened his closet, and shouted, That's it! My ties! Lyndhurst School will have a new playground. The next day, the entire town was plastered with signs. Mr. Tanen's tie action. Saturday at 7 p.m. at the Lyndhurst School. A tie for any occasion. All ties must go. Mrs. Sweet Apple noticed the sign on the grocery store window. She called her husband, Mr. Apple. Why is Mr. Tanen selling all his ties? Has he gone crazy? Mr. Apple told her about the school budget and the playground money. The town was buzzing all day. Mrs. Sweet Apple called Monsieur Bijou at the bakery, who called Cleo at the cleaners, who called Dr. Denny the dentist. It went on until even Zack, the night watchman at the zoo, got the word. Mr. Tanen is selling his ties. On Saturday, the whole town showed up for the auction. Monsieur Bijou started the bidding. I'll give you $50 for the donuts and Danish tie. Lolly, the librarian, bought the book tie. Dr. Denny was the proud owner of the toothbrush tie. Kaylee handed over her entire piggy bank for the hot dog tie. Mrs. Sweet Apple just had to have the wedding bells tie. And of course, Mr. Apple chuckled as he paid quite a bit of cash for the crab apple tie. The auction was a huge success. Every tie was sold except one. Mr. Tanen couldn't part with his beloved blue ribbon tie. It was a present from Mr. Apple for being a great principal. He looked out at the sea of the townspeople, all wearing his ties. Thank you all. I have always thought, my students, the more you give, the more you get. With this money, the Lyndhurst School will have a new playground. Mr. Tanen swallowed hard. My ties now belong to the town. Wear them proudly and throughout the spring. That's just what everyone did. But sometimes Mr. Tanen would forget his closet was empty. He would open it and get a tie. And with a tinge of sadness, he would remember he only had one tie and he was wearing it. Then he would look outside at the playground being built. You have to give to get, he thought. Soon it was opening day at the new playground. Mr. Tiny had invited the whole town to the rainbow cutting ceremony. He tucked his speech in his pocket, grabbed his special scissors, and adjusted his tie. He wished he had on his official ribbon cutting tie. His schoolyard was overflowing with people. Mr. Tane made his way through the crowd. Then he saw it. Mr. Tane's playground. The playground was tied in a giant rainbow made from Mr. Tane's ties. Mrs. Sweet Apple and Mr. Apple were at the microphone. Mr. Tane, you have taught us all, the more you give, the more you get, said Mrs. Sweet Apple. You have given us a playground. We are giving you back your ties. With that, Mr. Apple untied the tie ribbon and announced, Mr. Tane's playground is now open. Mr. Tane and his ties were together again. He slipped on his swing and slide tie and smiled.